everyone, welcome to my channel. For today's tutorial, we're doing another wallet. Oh, I'm so excited about this one. I've only done one other wallet tutorial and I am hooked on these things. They don't require a lot of hardware. They don't require a lot of fabric. However, you do have to be pretty careful with keeping your measurements exact. We're looking at like quilt block level preciseness here. So today's tutorial is showing you how to make the road trip wallet by Emmaline bags. That's right, it is so cute. Oh my goodness. Okay, before we dive into this, let's just talk a little bit about the pattern. Janelle from Emmaline Bags was super kind and sent me a physical copy of the pattern. Now, just so you know, I already purchased the digital copy of this pattern online before I received this. This is just so that I have a colored version of the copy to kind of show you little bits of as we go through the tutorial. In true Janelle fashion, this is not a pattern for just one thing. This is a pattern for 5 different items, I believe. So we have 3 different versions of the wallet, 3 different styles, and 2 of them can be made in a small or large size, and then 1 of them has to be made in a large size. So there's potentially 5 different wallet patterns in this one pattern. You can tell she gets so excited about these patterns and she just wants to share with you guys so many different options and variations depending on what you might want to make. And I totally can relate to that. I mean, I feel like it's a sign of a pattern designer getting extremely excited about a pattern. And as a maker, that should make you excited to make the purse or the bag or the wallet. All right, so I've already made 2 versions of this wallet. So let's go through the first version I made. This is the first one I made. I know, okay, you guys are gonna go nuts over the fabric. Let's just address the fabric in the room, okay? Yeah, the Epcot, the Magic Kingdom, it's backstitch fabrics. This fabric is so stinking hard to find. It is not for sale. You gotta buy it through resale. I have the tiniest scrap, and the person I made this for, of course, chose my unicorn fabric for their wallet. So this is version A in the pattern, and it's the small size. It's super soft. It's very bendable, flexible. You use fusible fleece in this pattern, so it does have like a pillow effect to it. It was totally fine for my machine. I had no problem with bulky layers. You can see we have 2 zippers on the very top. Now, these are not big enough for a full like dollar bill, a US dollar bill to fit in. You would have to fold your cash in order to put it in this. Today, we're gonna actually make the larger size, which is going to be big enough to put your dollar bills in just normally. The version A has a little snap right here. Now, I used pretty heavy duty snaps, and I don't think that this wallet with just cotton fabric really needs it. I did put a vinyl on the inside of the strap to kind of help stabilize the snap. And then you open it up and you have a bunch, it's hard to see with this fabric. So there we go. I put a card in here to help you see. But you have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 card slots on each side. And then in the middle, you have a little clear ID pocket that you can slide whatever you need in. And in that ID pocket, there's actually a little zip pouch behind it, like a little coin pouch. So the practicality of this pattern is phenomenal. I mean, this is a very useful wallet. It's not just super cute, it's super useful. But when I got done with this one, I was very proud of it. As we all know, I'm very proud of the things I make. However, I did feel like it was a little pillow-like. This would be a great gift for a younger person in your life who might be, you know, a little rough on things. But as an adult, I wanted it just a little bit firmer, just a little bit crisper. So I made a couple of adjustments. This is the second version. This is version B in the pattern, so it just has this magnetic snap. Again, this is the small size, so it has the same 2 zippers on the top. But you can see this one, it doesn't fold. On this one, instead of the fusible fleece, I actually used Pellon Decoville Light, which is my new favorite interfacing for everything. So I used that on the exterior instead of the fleece. Opening it up for the interior fabric, I used waterproof canvas. Now, the nice thing about waterproof canvas is that you don't have to interface it, and it does not stretch. When we go through this step, you will see the most important part of these card slots and this interior part is keeping everything the right size, which can be a problem when you're using stretchier fabric. even though we interface our cotton woven fabric, it still has a tendency to warp a little bit. This waterproof canvas, it's not gonna change at all. It is like paper. It will stay the size you made it. So I used that for the inside, which we'll be doing today. For the ID pocket, I used the exterior fabric. Inside is my business card. So for today's tutorial, we're gonna be making the B version again, except we're gonna be doing a larger one because I do wanna see the difference in the larger one. I will be using much the same method as I did with this one. We'll be using Decoville Light. We will be using waterproof canvas for the card slots. One of the changes we're gonna make here, I used the waterproof canvas for these interior lining pieces that will become your pockets for your dollar bills. I don't think that the waterproof canvas helped me there. I think that it did make it a little bit harder to sew, a little bit thicker, and kind of bulgy than it needs to be. So instead of the waterproof canvas for the interior of the pockets, we're going to use quilt cotton. And I'll be going through all of the materials in detail in the material section of this video. So that's what we're making today. I will say this pattern does come together fairly easily. I did not find any part of this wallet process extremely frustrating like I have with other patterns. So I highly recommend this road trip wallet. I think it has a beautiful finish. It has a really clean look. It comes together well. And when you get the pattern, I don't want the pattern to intimidate you. There are a lot of steps because she's giving you instructions every time for what you need to do for 5 different bags. All right, so don't think that the amount of instructions is indicative of how long it's going to take you to make this wallet. It does take time. Wallets do take more time than a simple boxy bag or pouch, but you can make this wallet. You can make this wallet. I promise you can make this wallet. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. We have brand new tutorials coming out every single Monday. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Anything you want to ask, say, recommend, leave them in the comment section down below. In the comment section at the very top will be a comment from me, and it will have timestamps for every single step of this tutorial. So if there's just one part of the pattern you're struggling with, you're going to click on the number of that timestamp and it's going to automatically take you there in the video. You don't even have to scroll through anything. All right, let's get started. Okay, let's first talk about the pattern. Of course, I will have a link for the pattern in the description below. Emmaline Bags provides a PDF version and a printed version. So you can order this and they will mail you this printed version, which is what Janelle mailed me. The nice thing about the printed version is that it is all in color. She does a fantastic job of highlighting everything so that at every step you don't get lost. I'm a big fan of the pattern itself. To go along with the pattern, they also mailed me this template for the card slots. Now I'll show you how to use this when we're making the card slots. You don't need this in order to make the wallet. She does provide the measurements for you to just draw the lines. This just kind of speeds up the process because you can lay it on your fabric and then just draw your lines as necessary. This works with the small and the large versions. This is also available on the Emmaline Bags website. So I will be using 4 different types of fabric today. This is my waterproof canvas. I got mine on Amazon. There are a lot of places you can find this, but I will have a link for this waterproof canvas in the description below. It is it's not as thick as vinyl, but it's thicker than quilt cotton. I do believe most domestic machines can handle this as long as we don't layer it up too much. And so for my alternative fabric choices in this bag, I made sure to not use too much of this, just enough to really provide a nice crisp card slot. You will need about 1/2 yard of your waterproof canvas. For my exterior, I will be using just quilt cotton. You'll need 1/4 yard of that. The exterior fabric will be used on the outside of the bag, and I will also be using it for this ID window here. You can get really creative with this. You can use any other type of fabric for this ID window to make it pop against these card slots. I'll be using a second quilt cotton for the zip pockets in the wallet. Now these zip pockets are just these top pockets right here, not for the coin purse, just the exterior portion. And this version, I did use the waterproof canvas, but I found that it bunched up quite a bit and it doesn't smooth itself out very well. Also, it added a lot of bulk and it's just not necessary, in my opinion, for this pocket. So instead of the waterproof canvas on the interior of these zip pockets, I will be using quilt cotton. If you're going to be using a second lining fabric, you're going to need about 1/4 yard of it. I'll also be using just a tiny bit of cork for an accent. Now this is just right here. This just provides a little bit more stability to this flap right here, and it's just pretty. So I will be using some cork for that part. I will be using 3 different interfacings today. I will be using this Pellon Decoville Light. You're gonna need about 1/4 yard of it. Really, you just need a long strip of it for the exterior. I'll also be using the Pellon Shape Flex, the SF101. You'll need 1 yard of this, and then just a scrap of this Peltex or Decoville Heavy for the flap of your wallet. You're gonna use 3 zippers in this pattern. You're gonna need 2 zippers that are at least 8 inches long and 1 zipper that is at least 6 inches long. I like to use longer zippers because it's what I have on hand. You could also use zipper tape for this. These zippers all come from Zip It on Etsy, and they are number 3 zippers. The next thing you're gonna need is a small cut of clear vinyl. Now you can get this from the packaging of bed sheets, all kinds of things you purchase at the store. You can also buy this. I'm using 20 gauge clear vinyl, and I bought this on the roll from fabric.com. If I can find it, I'll have a link for it down in the description. Since I'm doing version B today, I'm going to be using a magnetic snap. Now the pattern does call for slim magnetic snaps. I'm not really sure if these are considered slim or not. It's just what I have. You can buy a bunch of these on Amazon for a pretty decent price. I'll have a link for them down in the description below. For the notions today, you're gonna want some double-sided tape. This is a 1/4 inch double-sided tape I got from Amazon. The pattern calls for all-purpose polyester thread. I have actually not worked with polyester thread. I always work with cotton. If you generally use polyester thread in your bags, will you comment down below and tell me what brand you prefer? I've been on the hunt for some new thread that's not cotton, and I'm having a hard time finding something. And then I'm also gonna be using a fabric marking pen that disappears easily. This will be used purely to mark in the seams and areas that will be covered up later. So because I'm using different fabrics and different parts of this bag, I am going to show you the fabric cuts in a different order than what the pattern goes through. I apologize for that in advance. This is all of my exterior fabric. From my exterior fabric, the E and D pieces will be used for the exterior of the bag, and the rest of these pieces will be used for the clear flap on the middle of the bag. You can see that they all have letters clipped to them. Every single pattern piece is given a letter, and throughout the pattern, the letters are how she distinguishes when to use what. This is extremely helpful as a lot of these are very similar sizes and it would be difficult to remember which size everything is. So I do suggest as you cut out your pieces, you use either a piece of tape or like I do, this is just a piece of cardstock paper cut into tiny squares, and then label each piece of your fabric. It will help you stay organized and complete the pattern in a quicker time. Some of these are interfaced with Woven Fuse, but not all of them. I'll show you that she does provide a fantastic cutting chart right here showing you which letters need to be interfaced with what and cut at what sizes. I do suggest you hold on to that chart. For my flap cut, one side will be the exterior fabric and one side will be cork. My exterior piece, which is the outside of the wallet, is interfaced with Decoville Light. The Decoville Light is cut at the same size as the fusible fleece is in the pattern. As you can see, I'm not using fusible fleece at all. I just have some SF101 and then the Decoville Light on the exterior. So I will be using the waterproof canvas for all of my lining except piece I. For piece I will be using quilt cotton. You have 2 of these and they are both interfaced with woven interfacing. Now let's talk about cutting our lining pieces. This is a technique often used when making quilts. What she suggests doing if you're using non-directional fabric, for example, a solid color like I'm using, is cutting long strips of fabric, and then she tells you how to stack them and subcut them. This just makes the process go a little bit quicker, especially when you have a lot of the same size shapes to cut repeatedly. So this waterproof canvas is my lining. I will be using this for the card slots on the interior of the wallet, and I'm going to show you how we stack up these strips and subcut them. So I have 3 strips cut as she suggests in the pattern, and I like to stack up my strips just 2 at a time since this is a little bit thicker. Just line them up lengthwise like that. Grab your ruler and a rotary cutter and cut off the end just so we have a straight edge to work with. So she's going to have the measurements here for the cuts for all of these pieces. Just go along and cut them as you go. For example, this is just a quick way to cut 2 pieces of identical sized pieces of fabric. And if you look at the pattern, since I'm making the large size, I'm actually going to need 14 cuts of piece G. So that's a lot of cuts. So this just speeds up that process. All right, so here are my lining pieces all ready to go. These are going to be all the pieces I need to make the card slots on the inside of the wallet. As you can see, piece I is missing because, as I said, we're using a quilt cotton for that instead. These are all cut from waterproof canvas. None of these pieces need to be interfaced with woven interfacing. That's the nice thing about waterproof canvas, is that it will stay in its place. It needs no interfacing whatsoever. It's very firm. I do want to make note that most of the woven interfacing is cut at a smaller size than the pattern pieces. This is to help reduce bulk in the seams and keep that extra out of them. If you're cutting your G units using quilt cotton, you will notice that the woven interfacing is quite a bit smaller. She does provide a diagram in the pattern to kind of show you how to lay that out. Don't be too worried about centering it perfectly. The last pieces that you need to cut are your clear pocket for your ID window, and then a piece of Peltex. Now, the Peltex is used in the flap of the wallet. She does say that if you're using vinyl, you probably can skip this. I'm not using cork on both of the sides of my flap, so I do like to include this. I don't sew it in, I glue it in, and I'll show you how I do that when we get to that step. So the first step to making this wallet is making the card slots, and I actually really like that we start with that because it comes together very neatly. Her method of making the card slots is different than the other methods I've seen, and it gets you excited about making the rest of the wallet. So to make the card slots, you're going to need your F units and lay them right side up. We're going to be drawing on these, but don't worry, you're not going to see this in the end. She's going to provide you with measurements on where to mark your lines. If you have this handy dandy little template, you're just going to line it up on your fabric. If you're using the smaller cut of fabric, you're going to line up with the side with the hole along the edge of your fabric, and then the rest of this will probably overhang. That's okay. And all you have to do is mark in these slits. I just mark on the left side, the side closest to where the hole is, just along like that. And since I'm doing the large size of the wallet, I'm actually going to use all of these because the large size has 8 pockets on each side. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing with the other F unit. All right, now we have our lines marked. Now we're going to use our stack of G flaps. Now I have 14 of these. What you're going to do is you're going to take one of your G units and lay it right side down, wrong side up, and you're going to line it up with that first line. So the first line is the one that has the big space between the edge and the line, and you're just going to line it up right on that line, just like that. Now I'm going to clip it on the edge. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along this edge on the wrong side of our G unit at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, once you have your G sewn on, right sides together, you're going to take that opposite flap that's not sewn on anything and you're going to fold it up to meet the next line, just like that. And just line it up along the line. If you're using waterproof canvas, you might notice that it doesn't fold quite as well as you'd like. Don't worry about that. We're going to press it in the end and it'll be fine. So pin or clip this together along that line. Next, grab another G unit and lay it right side down on top of this same folded G unit, lining it up with the edge on that line. So we're just lining it up over the other G unit and then adding it to the clips. I know it seems a little crazy, but trust me, it works. Okay, so now this should be what you have. You have your F unit right side up with your lines drawn. You have a G unit right side down with the flap open, and then a folded G unit with the right side showing underneath. Now we're going to go and we're going to sew along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, so once it's sewn on, you should have something like this, folded. We're just going to continue that same process until we get to the last line. Once you have it folded up to that last line, stop using your G pieces. So if you're making the small wallet, you're going to use 4 G pieces on each F piece. If you're making the large like I am, you're going to use 7 G pieces. The last pocket will be a different pattern piece. So don't go overboard and use too many G's on one of your units. So your last G unit is going to go from the second to last line up to the last marked line. So pin that as you've done all the other ones. And now you're going to grab an H unit, which is just a little bit longer than the G's, and you're going to lay that right side down on top of that G unit, lining it up with the edge, just like you have been doing. And sew this on at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so finally take the raw edge of your H and lay that up against the very edge of your F panel, lining up the ends, and clip in place. Now sew this H unit down at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now what we're going to do is we're going to press these really well to get a nice crisp seam along the top of each card slot pocket. If you're using waterproof canvas, you might find this just a little bit difficult. Just press it as best you can. I actually flip it and press from the back using an iron with quite a bit of steam. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the top of each card pocket. When you're doing this, you want to flip the rest of them out of the way. So it's important before you top stitch, give it a good press. If you need to, press it with your fingers. If you're using waterproof canvas and you're having a hard time getting these to be nice and crisp, just press it down with your finger and use a couple clips on the pocket as you go. And then top stitch this one and do the same for the rest of them. Okay, for the next step, she does suggest using a walking foot, something to help keep all these layers in place as you sew them. What we're going to do is we're going to baste down the edges of our pockets. But while we do this, we don't want our pockets moving around too much. Now, if you're using waterproof canvas like I am, you really don't have to worry too much because these things are not going to twist around that much. If you're using quilt cotton, they can stretch, and the last thing you want is your pockets to be kind of uneven. So to make it easier, you can put some clips along the edges just to kind of hold all those layers in place. So when you're basting down your pockets, you're going to start on the right side from the very bottom and go up the pockets along the right side. Then to baste down the left side, flip over your unit so that you have the wrong side up. And again, start from the bottom and work your way all the way up to the top on the right side. Essentially what we're doing is we're making sure that our pockets are going bottom side down each time. Okay, just like that. You don't want to go bottom side down on one side and then top side down on the other side, because that's how you can get some misalignment with your pockets. All right, so here is what you should now have. If you notice that some of your card slot pockets are overhanging the F base, you can go ahead and just trim them down. We really want to make sure that this unit stays the right size. That's kind of the big deal with wallets, is that everything needs to be the right size. So I'm just trimming off any of the overhang from the pockets just to make sure it's the size that I need it to be. And they should be the same size. If you're using waterproof canvas, you'll notice that you don't have a whole lot of shifting or stretching. I did have more shifting and stretching issues using quill cotton. So grab one of your card slot units and grab 2 J units. You're gonna lay them along the sides of your card slot, put them down right side, lining them up along the longer edges. Going to take the other J unit on the other long edge and pin that on as well. I will say that this bulk right here on the sides of these card slots is bigger with the larger wallet. I didn't notice it being this thick. So if you're doing this for the first time and you're not quite sure how your machine is going to handle this, I suggest making the small version first, especially if you're using waterproof canvas. If you're using quilt cotton, I wouldn't worry too much about this bulk, but with the waterproof canvas being just a bit thicker, if you're not sure how well your machine can handle thicker layers, I would test it out with a small version of this wallet first. So go ahead and attach the other 2 J units to your other card slot pocket. All right, now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew on these J units using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. After we do our 3/8 inch seam allowance, we're going to do a second row of stitching just outside that 3/8 inch towards the seam to make sure that we don't have any thread ripping or anything like that. We're gonna do that for both sides of each unit. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and end of these and just go slow over the bulk if you're worried about the thickness. So now we're gonna go just to the right of that seam with another row of stitches. This is just gonna help strengthen your seam. Do the same for the other side. After you have your J units attached, make sure that your stitching is nice and straight. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna trim down the seam allowance. You're gonna go about 1/8 of an inch away from that second row of stitching that you did, being careful not to cut the stitches, which I know can be a little tricky because I know my scissors just seem to gravitate towards those stitches. Well, you don't wanna accidentally cut all of your stitching off. So do your best to stay about 1/8 of an inch away from it. Do the same with the other side. Do this for both of your card slot units. After you have your seam trimmed down, what we're gonna do is we're gonna press these J sides open. If you're using quilt cotton, you can go ahead and iron this open. And we're going to top stitch along the J unit at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're gonna do this for both sides for both pocket units. So I was noticing quite a few skip stitches, so I switched over to a jeans needle. See if that helps at all. So I will say that going through all these layers right now is pretty tough. I am using a Bernina 770 QE and a jeans needle and a dual feed foot. So I've kind of got every trick up my sleeve I'm using right now, and it's struggling. So if you're using an industrial or a semi-industrial machine, this is probably going to be a lot easier for you. If you're using a domestic machine, this might be challenging. But you can see as it top stitches, it has to go through all of these layers. That's a lot of layers. Once you have your J units on and top stitch, grab your K pattern pieces, and we're just going to sew these on the top and the bottoms. So right sides together, pin them along the top and bottom. Now we're going to sew on these K units at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You're going to also stitch your second row just like you did with the J units, just to make sure that it is as strong as possible. Once you have the K-strip sewn on, just go ahead and trim down that seam allowance to about 1/8 of an inch. Just press them open. And we're going to take this to the machine and top stitch these at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So once you have your J and K units top stitched down, we're going to trim down our pocket pieces to the right size. In the pattern, she gives you the proper size. What I do to do this is just use the grid lines on my cutting mat, and I mark where things need to go. So for example, on this line on the right, I'm going to line it up with the grid line, and it overhangs just a little bit here on the bottom right. So what I do is I line my ruler up with that top corner, and then with my mark as best I can. And then I'll use a rotary cutter to just trim along the edge of my ruler, just cutting off the excess. Now I'll do the same thing for the other side. So it needs to go from right here all the way to right here. And this just makes it easier to clean up because this center part is very bulky. Your ruler has a hard time staying flat on it. So instead of trying to line up my ruler over the top, I just line up my ruler along the thinner sides of the unit. And now my unit's the perfect size. I'm going to do the same with the other pocket unit, laying it right side down. And now your card pockets are complete. You can put these to the side. So now we're going to work on making the zippered ID pocket unit. You can see that I did attempt to make this with waterproof canvas, and it did not go well. It was just way too bulky, way too much for my machine. I don't suggest using waterproof canvas for this part of the project. So for today's wallet, I will be using quill cotton. So you're going to need pieces Q, P, and M. And what we're going to do is fold these lengthwise, wrong sides together, and press along each one of these pieces of fabric. Once you have them pressed, take your clear vinyl piece and take your Q unit and lay it along one of the shorter edges of your vinyl with the raw edges against the edge of the vinyl and clip in place. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to use some tissue paper on the bottom here to prevent this from sticking to our sewing machine. So you can see I have a scrap piece of tissue paper. I'm just going to lay my unit on top of it and sew this on at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I am able to use my presser foot to show where the 1/4 inch seam allowance is. If you don't have that option, just make sure you rotate your paper so that it's underneath the plastic, but not blocking the 1/4 inch marks on the bed of your machine. All you have to do is just pull off that tissue paper. Should come off fairly easy. It does like to get stuck sometimes in the stitches. Just use your fingernails to pull it out of there. So once you have your Q unit attached, pull up the folded edge of the Q unit and fold it over your clear vinyl and wrap it around so it covers those previous stitches, just like this. Once you have it where you want it, make sure you check both sides. Ideally, you won't see either one of the edges of fabric from the other side. However, if you end up with one side that looks better than the other, I'll show you what to do about that. So once you have your fabric wrapped around so that it's covering the stitches, we're going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along the edge that is loose with the fold on it at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to use tissue paper here again, but I'm not going to sew on it. I'm just going to use it to prevent my vinyl from sticking too much. After you top stitch along the vinyl, now we're just going to go ahead and press down on that Q unit and top stitch along the folded edge, also at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once again, I will be using the tissue paper, but I won't be sewing on it. Okay, you can put this to the side for now. Now grab your L unit and lay it so that the long sides are going left to right. Grab your 2 P units and we're going to clip these to the top and bottom long edges with the raw edges of the P unit against the raw edges of the L unit. Now we're going to baste these on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have your P units on, take your M unit and lay it so that the folded edge is pointing into the center of the rectangle, lining up the raw edges with the right side raw edges, and clip that in place. This should be overlapping your P strips. P strips. So now go to your machine and baste this on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, now grab your N unit and we're just going to sew this on right side down over the remaining raw edge of our unit at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now fold your N unit back and just finger press that open, just like that. Now grab your clear vinyl window, and if you have a side where the stitching looks better, just use that side right side up. What we're gonna do is we're gonna slide this underneath those flaps. It should be about 1/4 of an inch under each edge of these flaps, probably a little bit more. The space between your end seam and the opening of your window pocket should be about 1/4 of an inch. I honestly just eyeball all this, feeling around to make sure that it's underneath all of the flaps enough so when we top stitch this, we don't have to worry that we missed part of the vinyl. We're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along this entire rectangle, right around the window on the flaps at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to extend that top stitching over the seam of the end panel as well. So it's just going to hold everything down nice and neat. So when I'm top stitching, I like to start about 1/8 of an inch above the seam between my end unit and my bottom long strip. I find it makes it easier to connect my top stitching in the end rather than starting, let's say, in the middle of one of these long strips, because as you go around, your top stitching length might change a little bit and you'll end up with kind of a wavy line right here to connect it back. So if you start in a seam, you're more likely to have an even looking top stitch. So I just kind of eyeball, I push my needle down just to make sure it's about where I want. I do back stitch once in the beginning, in the end. Make sure you're holding down your flaps. You don't want this flap to move up whenever you go over it. I'm just gonna go over it a little bit so that it gets to about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then rotate. Go down that edge until you're about 1/8 of an inch past this edge. It can be a little bit hard to eyeball, just do your best. And again, just go about 1/8 of an inch past the seam on the end, and then go down. And you should meet up with your previous stitches. Once you're done, just go around and feel to make sure you included all of the plastic, and there is your little window. All right, you can put your window to the side. Now we're gonna work on the zipper pocket that goes with this unit. Grab the zipper you're gonna be using for your ID pocket. I like to cut off the end metal zippers first. Make sure you don't lose your zipper pull. And now she provides the measurements for how long this needs to be exactly. Make sure you trim it down to that length. So I just use the grid on my cutting mat to measure and then cut it with some scissors. There you go. Be very careful not to lose your zipper here. Now you can go to the sewing machine and just sew right along the edges of your zipper to make sure that the tails are held together. Next, we're going to build the zipper binding. Just grab your R unit and lay it right side down and fold it wrong sides together lengthwise. Next, open it up and take your long edges and fold them up to meet that press and press down one edge at a time. And then press the whole unit in half so you have this nice little strip of binding with no raw edges showing. Now take your binding and on one end slide in your zipper. Don't put it right in the middle because we're going to use the other half of this binding for the other end of the zipper. And then I just use a couple clips to clip it in place. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along this interior folded edge, including the zipper, at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have that attached, you can trim it off from your zipper and you can clean up both ends if you have any overhang on the other side. And now we're just going to repeat that process for the other end of our zipper. Just insert it into that fold. You won't be using this a third time, so if you want, you can put it in the middle. And once again, we're going to sew this on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once again, you can just trim down this zipper binding so it's the same width as your zipper tape. And now our zipper is ready to be installed. So grab your ID window with the opening on the left. Take your zipper right side down with the zipper pull when it's closed on the left side. And we're going to clip this on centered. So to assist you with that, you can just fold your whole unit in half and draw a line where the middle is. Do the same for your zipper and then line up those midpoint marks and clip together. Okay, now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to baste this zipper on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I do suggest using a zipper foot for this, especially if you have a bulky presser foot like I do. Next, grab your O units and lay your O unit right side down along the top of that zipper, lining it up with your clear pocket. Just like this. Now we're going to sew these together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you're using a zipper foot. Once your units are sewn together, go ahead and finger press them apart and then fold them wrong sides together, lining them up nicely. Now you can grab an iron and just press along the seam by the zipper. When you're pressing, make sure you don't touch your iron against that clear vinyl. Now this next piece is going to be the back of your ID pocket. So if you have a piece of fabric you really want to make sure is that piece, this is it. Lay that O piece right side up and grab your unit with the zipper and lay it right side down, centering it on that O piece. And then clip the zipper to the top of that back O unit. Now go to your sewing machine and baste this on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. After you have this basted on, take your last O piece and lay it right side down so that it's right side against the back of the zipper and also against the right side of the back of your unit. This should look just like this. Clip along that top edge. Now sew along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have that last unit on, just go ahead and finger press these open just like you did before, putting the wrong sides together, lining them up nice and even, and then just press this with your iron. All right, now we're just going to top stitch along our zipper. So what we're going to do is we're going to go along the front of our unit up to the end of our zipper binding, over the zipper binding, along the back, and again over the other end of our zipper binding. And we should have a nice rectangle all the way around our zipper. So I like to start my top stitching at a corner, not in the middle of one of my straight edges. So I'm just going to start at the top by my zipper binding, 1/8 of an inch away from the zipper. And I'm going to go all the way to the outer edge of my zipper binding, and then just top stitch 1/8 of an inch over that. Go about 1/8 of an inch over the seam, and then once again go around the zipper. If you are not great at keeping straight top stitch lines like I am, I do suggest you use a thread color that matches your fabric. I obviously didn't do that today, but if I were to use a darker gray thread, it would hide a lot of the imperfections right here. So once your zipper is top stitched, take the back panel for your pocket and the clear front panel and pull those right sides together. And then these will be the zipper lining panels, and pull those right sides together. So you should have something like this with the zipper in the middle. Go ahead and clip these edges together. You want to remember which side has the opening for the clear pocket. So I use just a different type of clip to mark that edge so I remember. And then I just use regular clips to clip the other 3 edges. You want to make sure you have your zipper open for this. So now we're going to sew along our 3 pinned edges. Remember, this edge over here with this hairpin, that is the side that has the opening to my clear pocket, and I want to leave that unstitched. So I'm just going to stitch the top, the left, and the bottom edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch well at the beginning and the end. Once you have it all stitched together, just clip your corners to reduce the bulk for when you turn it right side out. Now you can turn this whole unit right side out, and then you can give this a good press. Just again, make sure your iron doesn't go over the clear vinyl. And now your ID pocket is ready to be attached to your lining. So now let's attach our ID pocket to the card slot pockets. Grab one of your card slot pockets, and we're going to lay our ID pocket with the clear side up and the opening for the clear pocket on the left. And we're going to line it up with the left side of our card slot pocket, making sure that the openings of our card slots are pointed towards the left. So right now we pretty much have all of these pockets pointed towards the left, and we're going to center this on the card slot pocket. So just like normal, we can find the midpoint on both of these panels and then line them up properly. So I have the midpoint marked on my clear ID pocket and my card slot pocket. So I'm just gonna line them up along that midpoint and clip together along this left edge. You go, make sure it's sitting nice and even the way you like it. So now you can just quickly baste this down on your sewing machine using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have your center pocket basted on, take your other card pocket, again with the card slots pointing towards the left, and lay it right side down. So essentially, if you opened it up, all your card slot pockets are pointing into the center where your ID pocket is. All you have to do is lay that right on top of the other card slot pocket and clip together. It should line up perfectly. So now we're going to go to the machine and sew this together at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So the inside of your wallet should now look like this, with your ID pocket in the center and your card slots all pointing towards the middle of the wallet. If you're using cotton, you can go ahead and press this seam to one side or the other. Go ahead and put this to the side. Since I'm doing version B, I'm going to use the instructions on page 10 for that. So first you need to decide which one of your fabric pieces is going to be the underside of the flap. For example, in this previous wallet, I used the exterior fabric as the underside. I'm going to do the same in this wallet. So my exterior fabric is the underside. Now you can use the template that is provided in the pattern to mark a hole for your magnetic snap. So I'm going to take my fabric and flip it right side down, wrong side up. Now use the template and that hole to mark a dot on the back of your fabric, and this will be placement for your snap. Now grab a scrap piece of fusible fleece or felt, just something that can add a little bit of cushion for your magnetic snaps. And you're just going to fuse this right over that dot. Once you have the fusible fleece fused on, grab your template once again and lay it over your unit and remark the dot where your magnetic snap needs to go. So we're just redoing what we just did. This time we're including the fusible fleece. Grab the washer for your magnetic snap and line the circle over the dot just like that, and then draw a line where the two longer ovals are. These are your slits. So now grab a seam ripper and just carefully use your seam ripper to cut little slits along your marked lines. Don't let them go too far past. It's better for these slits to be a little bit too short rather than a little bit too big. There we go. If you want to, you can add a couple drops of fray check on these holes. I don't tend to do that, but just to be safe, it's probably a good idea. So now grab the male side of your magnetic snap and insert that through the right side of your fabric. Now take your washer and place that over your prongs and pull your prongs out, or you can push them in. Just to protect the other fabric in your flap, you can grab another piece of fusible fleece and just fuse this on over those prongs. So your flap should now look like this, with the male end of the snap on one side and the fusible fleece covering the back. Grab your other B unit. So for me, this is going to be cork. Now this is going to be what's seen on the exterior of the flap. And lay these right sides together. And you can go ahead and clip these together. You can just clip around the rounded edge since that's what we'll be sewing. So now let's go to the sewing machine, and we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're just going to sew along the curved edge, leaving the straight side open. Make sure you backstitch well at the beginning and the end of this stitch. Because I'll be sewing pretty close to that snap, I like to use a zipper foot for this step. Make sure you're feeling for where the metal part of your snap is so you don't get too close to it. You don't want to hit it with your needle. So now we're going to do a second row of stitches just outside towards the seam of our previous stitch. This is just going to reinforce it to make sure we don't have any problems with stitches kind of popping out later. So she suggests cutting this down to 1/8 of an inch seam allowance using pinking shears. Since I don't have pinking shears, I'm just going to cut it down using my regular scissors. And then I'm going to cut just very small slits around it without cutting into the stitches. This can be hard if you trim down your seam quite a bit. This is just going to allow the material to kind of fold over itself to help make a nice rounded shape without any weird lumps or bumps. If you do have pinking shears, I highly suggest you use those here. So now you can flip this so that it's right side out. If you're using quilt cotton on both sides, you can give it a good press now. So now we can add our stabilizer. So what you're going to do is you're just going to insert it in, and if it's a little too wide, you can trim it down. Mine is a little bit too wide on these ends here. So for me, I just kind of feel it out and eyeball it. So I'm just going to make it a little bit more rounded. There we go. So now mine fits in there real nice. Now the goal in the next step is to include the stabilizer in the top stitching. Just in case you don't, and I don't want you kind of stressing out about it while you're sewing this, you can use some fabric glue like this Beacon 3-in-1. And what I do is I just add it on the side that faces the cork. And I'm just adding some of the glue onto that Peltex, just a little bit, just to hold it in place. And then make sure it's all the way down and press down. That way, if you don't get it perfectly in the top stitching, it's not a big deal. It's not going to go anywhere. Now to keep the seams the way I want them, I'm going to use clips to hold them in place all around the curved edge. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch around this curved edge. If you are using the same thread in your bobbin and your top needle, I do suggest you top stitch this from the bottom where you can see your snap, just so you know how close you're getting. I did find that when I top stitched from the top, I was getting a little close to that magnetic snap, and then my top stitching would get kind of wavy. This just allows you to view it better. Once again, I will be using a zipper foot. So there you go, the top stitching is done. If you didn't glue in your Peltex and you really wanted to make sure it was included in the top stitching, you could do a second row of stitching just to the inside of our first row, and that would make sure that it really got it. So now once you're done with your flap, grab your exterior D unit. Now I'm gonna kind of flip up the orientation of my wallet because the design that I want on the front of the wallet where the flap shows is over on the left. So I'm going to install my flap on the other side. So just to stay with the diagram, I'm going to flip my design upside down, and I'm going to take my flap and center it along the left edge, and then just clip it in place. So now we can go to the machine and just base this in place. All right, once you have this basted in place, you're gonna wanna add the other snap. So you're gonna wanna find the midpoint of the opposite end that doesn't have the flap, and you're gonna mark it in based on the diagram that's provided in the pattern. And we're gonna install this just like we did the other snap tab, but this time we can start on the right side. So just center your washer over that dot and use the ovals to mark your slits. Go ahead and use a seam ripper to help you rip through those marks. Now you can cut off a scrap piece of fusible fleece, and you can adhere this fusible fleece covering those marks on the back of your D unit. You can go ahead and recut those slits. Just don't make them any bigger than you already did, just to include the fusible fleece. Now insert the female end of your magnetic snap into those slits. Add your washer and pull those prongs whichever direction you like. Grab another scrap piece of fusible fleece and then just fuse that over those prongs so it doesn't poke the lining of your bag. Now you can see, because of the way I cut my fabric, my wallet's actually gonna open opposite of my previous version. So in my previous wallet, I had the closure on the right. This time, when this closes, it's going to be on the left. So if you have a preference, just be careful of that when you're cutting out your fabric. I don't mind it this way, but when you're cutting out your fabric, if you have a main design that you really want close to your flap, make sure you cut it so that it's more on the right side of this long D piece, not on the left side. All right, you can go ahead and put this to the side. So now we're on step 6. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is cut these zippers down to size. There is a different size for the small and the large version, so make sure you make note of which one you're making and cut the right size. I like to cut the zipper ends off. Once you have your lines marked, you can just go ahead and cut them down. All right, now go ahead and take these to the sewing machine and just baste down both ends of your zipper so that you don't have to worry about the zipper flying off at any point. So now let's make the zipper binding. You're gonna take your piece E and lay it right side down, and then just fold it in half lengthwise and press along this long folded edge. Now open up your fabric and take each long raw edge and fold it up to that middle pressed fold and press again. All right, you can go ahead and fold this in half so that you have folded edges on both of the long sides. Now all you have to do is take your zipper and lay it in that binding, and you can actually put them in at the same time. So there's one, and here is two. Again, make sure you don't really center it. You want to have enough of the binding to do the opposite ends of both of these zippers, but you have plenty of space. All right, now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along this interior folded edge over the zipper at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once you have them top stitched, you can go ahead and trim down the zipper tape around those edges, just so it's the same length as the zipper. And now we're going to repeat this process for the opposite ends of our zipper, just laying them in that zipper binding. If you're using the open ends like I am, just make sure that they're tucked together. All right, once again, let's sew these on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Just like before, go ahead and trim down that extra. So now your zippers are all ready to go. Grab your interior piece and we're gonna mark 5/8 in from each edge of the pocket panels. This is just gonna help us center our zippers. So from the far left corner, we're going to go in 5/8 of an inch. And from the right side, when you're marking, just make sure you're marking right along the edge so that it will be eaten up by the seam. You won't see this later. All right, now take one of your zippers and lay it right side down with the zipper when closed. The zipper pull will be all the way to the right. You're gonna lay this right in between those marks. It should line up pretty perfectly. If it's just a little too long or a little too short, that's totally fine. Just make sure it's centered using those 2 marks. So now grab your second zipper and you're gonna lay it right side down. This time when the zipper is all the way closed, the zipper pull will be all the way to the left. So our zippers are facing one another when they're closed. Again, just center it on those marks. All right, now we're gonna baste on our zippers at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have your zippers basted on, grab one of your zipper pocket lining panels, and this is piece I. Grab one of them and lay it right side down over your card slot panels. And then just clip it to the edge that you just basted your zippers onto, all the way down the line. So now we're gonna sew these units together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you're using your zipper foot. I will say it can be a little bit difficult to sew next to this middle pocket. So when I sew the first panel, I make sure the pocket is down on the bottom. And then as I sew, once I get over this middle seam between the 2 card pockets, I'm going to rotate that middle pocket over to the top panel, just so it's out of my way. So all I do is rotate this pocket so that it's up at the top. So now you can pull that lining and the card slot panels away from one another, and then wrong sides together. You can press this here if it makes it easier. So now grab your D unit and lay it right side up, however you want the finished design to be. Grab your card slot unit and we're gonna lay this right side down, so card slots down with the lining side up, and we're just going to center it along the edges of our D unit and clip our zipper to the top. Make sure that the short edges are matching up. All right, let's go to the sewing machine and just baste this zipper onto that D unit at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So once you have your D unit basted on, grab your last lining unit, which is your I panel, and just lay it right over that edge of the zipper that the D is attached to, and line it up with the D unit along that long edge. So now we're going to sew these units together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Go nice and slow as you're sewing here, making sure to keep your lining panel lined up with that zipper edge. And then also keep a close eye on where your zipper pull is and make sure to move it out of the way as you're sewing. The slower you go here, the less mistakes you're gonna make. Now, just like we did before, I do like to move this ID pocket out of the way of the panel that I'm sewing on, just because it adds a lot of bulk. All right, now you can open up your unit so that you have the exterior on one side and the card pockets on the other side and the lining pieces separate. Now, if you're using the interfacing like I am, you're gonna have to give this a good push down. First finger press, and then we'll press. You might notice that your lining is shorter than your exterior and your card slot pockets. That's okay, it's supposed to be shorter. if you look at the sizes of the fabric cuts, it actually is a smaller size. All right, let's flip it over and press it from the right side. So now we're going to top stitch a large rectangle around the zippers on the exterior, up the zipper binding, along the card slot pockets, and then back over the zipper binding. If you have a situation like I do where the lining is peeking out over here, over the exterior, to make sure that that stays back, just clip the bottom edges in the middle of the exterior and the lining piece, and that will help keep it back. And I'm going to do that on the edges as well. That will just provide a little bit more of a pull against that lining, so that while you're top stitching, you make sure you kind of curl that lining under so you don't see it in the finished wallet. All right, so now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and top stitch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So when top stitching this, I do suggest starting at a corner of our rectangle rather than, you know, the very middle of a long edge. I know that it's tempting to do that, but in the end, it will help all of your points meet up neatly if you do the top stitching at a corner point. So for example, I'm just going to start right here on the corner of my zipper binding in the card slot pocket. And that way I can also do a small back stitch. If there's anything getting in your way, like the flap or this middle ID pocket, just move it out of the way while you're top stitching that area. Okay, once you get to the stitching for your zipper binding, go ahead and rotate and just go over that stitching on the zipper. Now we're going to go along the card slot section. Again, I make sure to move this middle pocket out of the way as I'm sewing on this side of the card slots. Pull this out of the way as you're going. Once I cross that seam between the two card slot pockets, I raise my presser foot and I move this middle pocket out of the way and just kind of pull it back to the side, just so it doesn't get stuck under my presser foot until I'm past it, and then I just keep it over there so I don't have to worry about it while I'm sewing this side of the wallet. So this is where we now are. We have our top stitching done around our zippers. So what we're going to do first is open up our zippers and then take your exterior unit and your card slot unit and pull those up right sides together, and pull your lining units right sides together. And now we're going to clip these together around all 4 edges. For the seams between the exterior and cards and the lining, I like to fold the seams towards the side that has a thicker base. So for example, I'm not folding my seams towards the lining, I'm folding them towards the exterior and the card slot units. So now leave about a 6-inch opening on the bottom of one of the lining sides. You're going to want to make it closer to one corner or the other. Don't make it right in the middle because it's going to make it hard to close in the end. So I'm going to make it closer to the bottom left corner. And you want it to be about 6 inches. It's going to help you turn it out in the end. So now we're going to go around this entire unit except for our 6-inch opening mark. And we're going to sew it together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After we do 1 row of stitching, we're going to go back and do a 2nd row of stitching just outside of that 1st row, closer to the seam. This is just going to reinforce it to make it a much stronger wallet. I am still using a zipper foot because we are going to be getting kind of close to some thick, bulky areas without actually going over them. And I find having a zipper foot just helps me get close enough to them without having, wonky stitches. If you have trouble with fabric shifting around too much, you can use some sort of a stiletto to help hold it in place. This is a really cool seam ripper stiletto that I just recently got off of Etsy. I'll have a link for their shop down below. If you feel that clear middle pocket kind of getting in the way, just push it over. All right, once you have the first round of stitching done, we're gonna do a second row just outside of that first stitch line. So before we turn this right side out, you can go ahead and clip your corners down a little bit. And now you're just gonna turn it all out through the zipper. It can be a little challenging if you use that waterproof canvas. So I will say that the hardest part of this whole wallet is turning it out in the end, especially if you're using this waterproof canvas. This stuff does not want to bend and fold the way it needs to in order to be turned out. So, like, my hands are actually sore right now. That's very hard to turn out, this waterproof canvas, when you have so many layers of it in this tight space. Sure does look nice, but it does make that part more challenging. All right, so before we press this and finish it up, let's go ahead and close this seam. So you can see you want it on one side because it has to pop out of one of the zippers in order for you to close it. So just fold it down. What I like to do is just kind of roll it down and then tug at the corners and just press it together. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then clip along that folded edge. God, my hands hurt so bad I can't even use the clips. All right, now we're gonna sew along this opening at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, you can go ahead and put that pocket back in there. Now just run your hand along the inside of your lining to make sure the corners are all poked out really well. And now we're going to press the front. If you used waterproof canvas, then you don't have to press this. Obviously, it looks fine. But the Decoville Light does wrinkle up quite a bit, so I'm just gonna press the exterior. I am using steam when I press this, and I do find that it presses much easier and quicker when I do that. All right, so we can take a little preview of this. There we go, that looks pretty nice. So now the last stitches. What we're gonna do is we're going to close up this gap between these two pockets because you don't want that there. And it's gonna create a nice fold along the middle so that it stays in a book-like shape better. So one option here is to sew a rectangle around this center flap, just like that. And that's going to close up these pockets and that's going to create a nice fold along the edge. Another option is to start at this corner of your top stitching and go down the side of your wallet along the bottom all the way back up to the top to that other corner of your top stitching, and then just do 2 parallel lines going along the interior of your wallet. This will create a similar effect and it will help prevent the edges from the bottom and the side of the wallet from rolling out and being seen. I did something similar to that with this first wallet. You can see I went around the entire perimeter of the wallet, and then I have my rectangle in the middle. For this wallet, when I used cotton woven for everything, I did find that it gave it a bit of a cleaner look because it was just a little too puffy around the edges. But in today's tutorial, I'm just going to show you how to do it the way the pattern suggests by making a rectangle around our center flap. Make sure your bobbin thread is thread that you're okay with on the exterior because the bobbin is what's going to be seen on the outside. I'm still using my zipper foot. You don't have to, but it does make it easy if you want to get kind of close to this middle pocket and not have to worry about it getting pushed out of the way too much. What I'm going to do is start at this top stitch seam at the very top, always starting my top stitching on a corner, and then I'm just going to go straight down. All right, are you guys ready for the final reveal? Oh, it's so pretty. I love this little owl on the front. I do feel like I could have moved it over just a little bit, but that's okay. That's okay. Pattern placement takes time. So let me show you this wallet compared to the small size. Remember, today we built the large. This is the small. They are the same height. The only difference is the width, just like that. And since this one is longer, it does fit US dollar bills straight down versus the small where you're going to have to fold them to fit them into that zipper pocket. Also, because of the pattern placement, I actually switched which side I put this little snap tab on. Not a big deal to me, but if you do have a preference, you're going to want to make sure you think about that before you cut out your exterior fabric. So when we open up this wallet, look inside, we have this beautiful waterproof canvas on the side. We have 8 pockets. Here is our center ID pocket where I put my business card. It has a little change purse right there. I mean, this is such a stinking cute wallet. I really love this wallet. I will say, out of all of the wallets I have made, this pattern came together the easiest. At no point during the process of making this wallet did I struggle a great deal. I will say it does take a good amount of time. There's a lot of steps, and you really want to make sure you're precise with every single one of them, because one small mess up in the beginning could cause a big problem in the end. However, I think with 5 different pattern options, this is a great pattern. If this is your first time making this wallet, especially if this is your first time making any wallet, I highly suggest you make it fully with quilt cotton first. It is much easier to make. It does have a very soft feel. It's very cute. It comes together very well. When you start throwing in the waterproof canvas and the Decoville light, you are adding a lot more structure to your wallet, so it has a very professional feel to it. However, it's also tougher, so it's thicker. So the most challenging part by far of making this wallet was birthing it, was turning it all right side out. And that was purely because of my choice to use waterproof canvas. Waterproof canvas, it wants to just be where it is and not be messed with. And turning it all out, especially with all these layers for the pockets, it was very challenging. I mean, my hands were hurting for a while afterwards. So if you're new to waterproof canvas, I think this is great to give it a try with. Make the smaller version first with the waterproof canvas. I mean, I love the way that this feels. It's such a nice fit in my hands. I don't know. I really like this wallet, guys. So I just want to say thank you to Janelle for sending me a copy of this pattern and sending me one of the templates for the card slots. It is a beautiful wallet to make. I truly hope you make one. I really do. It is so much fun. The finish is so professional. It's one of my favorite wallets, just feeling, just holding, just making. Thank you so much for watching the tutorial today. I hope that this inspires you to go out and make a road trip wallet. If you do make one, make sure you share it with me on social media. You can tag me. I'm OklaRoots on Instagram and on Facebook. You can join our Facebook group with the OklaRoots Creatives. Just give us a search in the Facebook search bar. If you have any questions or comments, make sure to leave them in the comment section down below. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider clicking subscribe. I hope you have a great rest of the week. Get out there and make something. Bye!